Move to 6.7, 10 a.m., presentation and consideration of the Economic Development Work Plan. And this is presented by admin.
Presenting today will be DCAO Ben Rickelman.
Welcome, Ben.
Welcome. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, that'd be great. Good morning, Chair Pyska, Board of Supervisors. As mentioned, Ben Rickelman. I am a new Deputy County Administrative Officer. I've been with the county for about 3 months. I have about 10 years in economic development, and I want to give an update what I'm working on and what's occurring in the future. This is not a strategic plan. I think strategic economic development plans are great. I've done a few, and they bring a lot of clarity to kind of the present environment in providing kind of medium to long-term strategies and looking what resources you can leverage. Next slide. Oh, I can do that. So when I was thinking through my work plan, what's an appropriate way to use resources and time, I came to these 4 focus areas that I think reflect kind of what are the opportunities out there in Lake County. Funding opportunities, communications, business development, and place-based economic development. So since there's a lot going on in broadband, I thought I would start with this. I know there was an update a few months ago, so I'll go fairly quickly. Working with our consultant, CBG Communications, the updated master plan will be ready in August. So we're wrapping up meetings with a bunch of different community partners, tribal nations, the private sector, getting a lot of good input, utilizing the master plan, and then thinking through the different federal funding opportunities. We're going to put together an implementation plan. Active right now is the federal funding account. So this comes with a combination of federal funding in the state of California. Lake County has about $28.5 million dedicated for last mile broadband infrastructure. There's some stipulations on the program that I think will have an impact on Lake County in utilizing this. So the state clarified, I'd say in about the last month, that it has to be wireline. So you can't use fixed wireless. So when you think of the topography of the county, fairly mountainous terrain in the more rural areas, that's going to have an impact on which projects are feasible. So working with a few different ISPs to identify projects that kind of pencil with the subsidy per household to provide high quality broadband infrastructure. The map on the right is the middle mile. So this is kind of, if you want to think of the highway of the internet. This is the state's plan for Lake County. So going 20, 29, and 175. They have a target of, by the end of 2026, of completing all the middle mile in the plan for the state. And Lake County is a little higher up on the list, so that should help. I have heard there's some issues with inflation and getting labor force to specific middle mile projects that it's a bit delayed. Another broadband initiative, within the state's bill, there's a $775 million loan loss provision that's being, I think it should be utilized by RCRC, has contracted with these 2 firms that have built open network broadband networks. So they presented the county their high-level design about a month ago. And then in a few months, they're going to have a low-level design for specific areas where they see a cluster of unserved, underserved houses where it's feasible to set up a open network broadband solution. So there's a lot of exciting things in broadband, but trying to make the puzzle fit, I think certain communities, due to the state not allowing FFA money to be for fixed wireless, there has to be some other solutions. So one thing I'm going to explore when the funding window opens again is the California Advanced Services Fund. And it's a state of California program for broadband. It doesn't have kind of the funding power as the FFA, but it has wider parameters. So it could be an interesting solution for certain areas of Lake County. And there's one more. I know there's a lot of broadband things moving around, but it's called BEAD, the Broadband Equity and Advanced Deployment. That comes from the infrastructure law. That was just what was recently announced about 2 months ago, that California received approximately $1.8 billion. So that hasn't touched Lake County yet. The California Public Utility Commission says the earliest localities could see that money is the middle of 2024. A nice thing about BEAD is you probably will be able to use fixed wireless. So there's been some back and forth in Congress between the NTIA and congressional representatives advocating for that. So it seems like the feds have shifted their position somewhat. But one thing to consider with BEAD, there won't be a fixed allocation, or it seems like that at the moment, for Lake County. So with the FFA, we have this $28.5 million bucket of money, whereas with BEAD, it's going to be more competitive grants. Some more acronyms. This is the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy. It's a medium to long-term strategic planning document that takes an analysis of kind of the current economic conditions and then thinking through different economic development strategies for a specific region. For Lake County, we are our own economic development district. The Lake County EDC has acquired some EDA funding to assist with this. So the last time Lake County completed a CEDS was in 2016, and that matters because EDA prefers localities to have CEDS been completed within the last 5 years, and then you can leverage that in current CEDS for different EDA funding opportunities. So kind of the two reoccurring EDA funding opportunities is adjustment assistance, which is kind of a catch-all, and then public works, which is physical infrastructure that's tied to high-quality job creation. The CEDS is also useful in regards to the EDA when there's kind of one-off funding opportunities. So EDA's received a good amount of money through ARPA and the CARES Act. So it's always something good to kind of have in reserve so you can show you've gone through this federal planning exercise and you're speaking the EDA's language.
Can we go back to that? Sorry. So it says 2023, 2024 timeframe for an updated CEDS. Is that the timeline that we're on?
Correct.
Okay.
So we just received the EDC just received the planning money a few weeks ago.
Okay.
So they're going to be issuing an RFP, I think in 2 to 3 weeks, to hire a consultant. So it's going to take some time. There's a fair amount of outreach, so it's going to be talking to a lot of different industry. And kind of for the size of Lake County, we should be able to touch almost every industry here. And then working with workforce, local and state government too.
What was the amount of the technical assistance?
I think it was around 80,000 the EDC received.
Okay, so it's rolling now. Or just
Yes.
about to get rolling?
Yes.
Okay, great.
I would say it's going to get serious probably in the fall,
Okay,
by the time you process the RFP and hire the contractor. So more economic development planning with an acronym. This is the Community Economic Resilience Fund. So the governor's office, GoBiz, with ARPA funding, set up a $600 million pot. There's been a lot of emphasis in economic development the last few years, particularly with COVID, but also then how can you take this crisis and kind of make it an opportunity in the decades to come? So this idea of economic resiliency and recovery has been really big at the federal level, and that's filtered down to the state of California. So there's this pretty robust planning group. Humboldt Poly is the lead organization, and then Arcata EDC is the fiscal agent. So they've been doing a lot of analysis, and it's publicly accessible. They put out a bunch of different slide decks about the region, different challenges, different opportunities as it has. But I think this is kind of what I want to draw attention to now, is the governor's office announced, I want to say 3 to 4 weeks ago, that they decided with SURF to create these buckets of money within it called, it's called the Catalyst Program. So this is the $26.5 million for each region is dedicated. And our region is Lake County, Del Norte, Humboldt, and Mendocino. And a nice thing about this bucket of money is it's for both pre-development and development. So that means you don't have to have a shovel-ready project. You can kind of be blue sky, whiteboard ideas, and you can, I mean, it's a competitive grant, so it has to be a compelling idea, but you can start somewhat at the beginning. So there isn't a time frame yet when those are due, but there's several different participants in Lake County, which is great, and been happy to plug in, and hopefully we will be pushing for a Catalyst program funding soon.
so the 26.5 million is for the 4 counties.
Correct.
And so those participants in the county would apply for that bucket of funds within Redwood.
Correct. And it doesn't have to be local government. It could be any entity that has kind of a compelling project. Before my time here, there was these kind of pilot programs. So Humboldt County, through the SBDC and the port, got some money to modernize the port at Fort Bragg. I think it was 7 or 8 million. So they do have an emphasis on equity and then environmental resilience. So there's a big emphasis kind of dealing with the impacts of climate change, but how that can also connect with economic growth and opportunity.
Supervisor Spatier?
Yeah, just a quick question. You kind of alluded to it, but I don't know, sometimes the definition is different from person to person. You said equity, and typically that means equity within a population. I just want to make sure, is there a way to ensure that there's equity between the 4 counties that are represented? Not to say we get an equal, perfect share of the pie, but that it doesn't all end up in somewhere else and that we can all benefit from that. Obviously, we have to submit projects. You mentioned that we have a few people on the board with SURF or that are active with SURF. Just want to kind of check in, is there a way to ensure that we get something rather than seeing the 26.5 going somewhere else?
Well, first, I think it's important to be proactive. I'll just say my experience here, you know, Humboldt has a larger population. It just has a more, I would say, robust economic development presence, just, you know, more people on payroll, more organizations. So, yeah, I think that is going to be a challenge. And So that's why I'm kind of starting the outreach and speaking throughout the community to see if there's kind of compelling projects. I mean, it could also be a project across counties. So I don't know if there's something appropriate for all 4 counties, but there might be some partnership that makes sense. It could be like a workforce development project between Lake and Mendocino, which faces similar workforce needs.
And so basically, priming ourselves to be as competitively attractive as possible, I would suggest anytime you need to come back to the board so that we can help out in some way, shape, or form, or alert us to what we can do on our individual basis outside of the board, I would be happy to, I think we should make sure to try to get as much of that 26.5 as possible, or our fair share.
Sounds great. So this is the last funding opportunity slide. I know kind of gone through a lot of government programs. I did want to highlight EV chargers because that is going to be in the pipeline. And I think kind of our current condition with EV chargers puts us at a competitive disadvantage and just kind of the strictly economic development lens. So I've heard of several people running out of juice with their Tesla coming up here on vacation. And I think if that happens to you, you're probably not going to visit Lake County again. There's only a few EV chargers here. We also have the issue with the people, with institutions that do have EV chargers. When they break, it's very expensive to fix them because you have to bring in repair staff from out of county. So I think the NEVI, the federal funding in the infrastructure law could be a game changer for Lake County. The state of California, the Energy Commission is going to issue their first solicitation in the next few weeks. That isn't going to include 20 and 29, but I think based on the state's ranking system, we'll be in the second solicitation. So it should be, I'd say in the medium term, they say they want to issue all those solicitations by the beginning of 2025, but I think Lake County's will be in 2024. But as part of my various outreach tasks, I do want to bring to attention businesses and institutions the new 30C tax credit. So this is in the IRA. It gives about 30% off on installation costs. The one kind of catch with it is it does have a prevailing wage standard. So reconnecting with the North Bay Alliance and talking about workforce, that directly connects with the second funding opportunity listed. So this is a new one-off EDA program. There was about $200 million appropriated in the CHIPS Act, and the idea for this is to assist localities that have significant employment issues. So actually the main qualifier is counties that have a lower prime age employment rate, so 25 to 54, which I think is actually the best, single best labor market indicator there is. The unemployment rate only measures people that are actively looking for work, are the one you hear in the media, the U3. So anyways, this is to devise unique kind of needle-moving workforce development strategies. And then if you get to the second phase, they call it implementation grants. So actually it could be renovating a building, acquiring equipment. It could be a whole new CapEx construction. So it's going to be highly competitive. But I've started having conversations with individuals in the county and also in Mendocino. Kind of the direction, I mean, there isn't express rules, but the geographic scope EDA's somewhat directed to is kind of 2 to 3 counties for a geographic area. So I think we fit well. We'll definitely be working with the Workforce Alliance on this, and we'll see where it goes. And happy to provide an update when I just started on this the last week or two, but it's fairly significant, so I thought I would bring it up. Biomass. So I'm sure there's been lots of conversations about this. It would be great for the county. The question is, can it be economically feasible? So having some conversations with RCRC, they are pursuing some projects in some other California counties. There is an issue with Lake without having freight rail access. Can a project like this pencil? So exploring some possibilities with different, if there could be an injection of grant funding or a partnership with another locality that does have those transportation assets, and we could be part of a consortium. Just because there's such a need in the public safety side, if there's some way we could get this to be even cash flow neutral, that'd be great. And then finally, Economic Recovery Corps. So this is a ARPA-funded program that recently started. It funds a full-time fellow devoted to economic development, so they're looking for kind of a mid-career professional. It's a national program administrated by the International Economic Development Council. Submitted an application at the end of June. It would be jointly between County of Lake and then the Habamatolel Pomo of Upper Lake. So it would be a 50-50 split. Haven't heard back, but we'll provide an update when I do.
Yeah, that's very cool.
It's for 5 years?
2.5.
2.5.
So getting more kind of into the bread and butter, kind of what are the low-hanging fruits, but what I think really needs to be done and what I'm going to be spending a decent amount of my time on for kind of the next half year. Thinking through different communication strategies, different resources, and then also how do we sell the county. So I think Visit Lake County does a great job regarding tourists, and that's their specific mission, which, what that assessment's for, and it's great they have a board there that that's what they're focused on. So this is kind of outside of that. This is how do I build a business in Lake County, making the case to invest in Lake County, kind of explaining the quality of life. So putting kind of the online platform, but then also thinking through the marketing collateral. And from what I've seen in the county, some of it's a bit dated. So putting a kind of a higher level design polish on those pieces too. And also devising kind of explanatory pieces. So I think Lake County is a lot better than some localities in California, but just being in California, it is difficult to build here. It's complicated. Time is money. And so if people are more aware of the process up front, what are the costs? Are they budgeting kind of a realistic time frame into their project? Do they know kind of all the different approval verticals they have to go through, even outside of the county government? And so there's kind of more of an upfront awareness. I think that would be useful. Been also talking with community development with certain, how the process can be changed a little bit. So with broadband, I think batch permitting would be great. So if you have the same applicant doing a bunch of similar projects, how can you batch them together to increase the workflow? And then because this broadband construction is coming, thinking through a dig once policy. And so I want to kind of present an open door resource online that sells the county in a professional way, but also provides kind of realistic expectations for starting and maintaining a business here. And then also, this touches on also kind of selling the county and providing a realistic picture. So people within Lake County, I think, have a really strong sense of place and pride in their local community, which is great. But I think if you're someone a few hundred miles away from Lake County, you probably do not have that context. And I think that can be a real strong selling point. It's not for everyone, but, living in a semi-rural county that's beautiful, that has, it's a good place to raise a family, there's a lot of outdoor recreation. How can the county's website reflect that and kind of really tell those stories, and highlighting individual businesses and entrepreneurs and kind of their community partnerships also? So I've heard, and this is not what I was anticipating when I started this job, but from many different industries, this is kind of a choke point, is the amount and quality of hotels here. So we do have some great lodging options, but A, it's a big county geographically. B, kind of the higher end product is somewhat limited. We do have some interesting, I guess I'd call it experiential product coming on, which is great, but that kind of applies to a specific market and audience. So I think there's a disconnect between kind of people doing the traditional site selection. They're just running the demographics, kind of the labor market data through and plugging it into their pro forma. And clearly, I think they're looking at the commute patterns, and, it takes a while to get it in and out of Lake County. So we're not having success there. So I think we need to tell that story ourselves. And so that's gathering specific stories and data from the industries here and kind of making that case. I've seen a lot of success with kind of these unique either redevelopment plays or specific real estate attraction with issuing an RFI. So it just gives developers and investors kind of a 2-page summary and explaining the county's vision and how we can maybe facilitate it, but also kind of what are the compelling use cases here. If need be, it could also entail me telling the story outside of Lake County, because the capital really isn't here for these projects. So you can have an online presence, and that's a great place to start, but there might need to be those in-person, one-on-one conversations. Another strategy is just thinking through site identification. So with the entitlement CEQA processes here, that can be intimidating, or just kind of initially cross these projects off the list. Because usually what I've seen with site selection, their operating mode is, first, how do I eliminate this location? So we kind of want to flip the conversation and show them there's a path forward. And so with the different attraction strategies, the online platform, my budget is roughly $40,000. So that primarily goes to design work. I understand in local government, not everything needs to be kind of a marketing sheen on all the products you put out, but I really think in economic development, it's a pretty good ROI. Working with a professional design firm, it doesn't have to be anything super high-end, but kind of a certain level of competency, producing pieces, has the software, has experience in these industries, I think is really useful. Last slide. So I believe place-based economic development is really important. It is nice the state of California does have the CDBG economic development set aside. I do think what the county has traditionally utilized it for is still important. Small business lending, I've been working with CEDS somewhat in that capacity, especially with tightened credit conditions with the Federal Reserve. That being said, people want to have a quality community to live in, and there's certain tools and strategies you can employ. I've worked on facade improvement programs before. I think they're great. They don't cost that much per business, and they can really change the perception in the community. They can start that virtuous circle then where people want to invest in adjacent properties. But, we have a lot of small businesses here that have pretty tight cash flow. So to make these investments is a significant ask. So that's where these facade improvements programs really kind of step in. On the flip side, I know there's some issues with code enforcement, and that can also have an impact on economic well-being, kind of on the other side of the spectrum. So I think this is also a good application of the CDBG funding. So we'll be working in the future to figure out kind of the allocation between small business lending support, facade, and code enforcement. If funding permits, it might be in the future, but if funding permits, I think another great use that's relatively inexpensive but can have a big impact is signage and wayfinding, especially in this county where there's a lot of interesting things to do, businesses to visit, but it's fairly disparate. It's kind of nodes are on its own. So, there's a good amount of people now that will do kind of rigorous online research, but what about that next thing to do when you're in Lake County are kind of opening their eyes and then just leaving a good positive impression when you leave and enter the county. So here are my anticipated timeframes. So the production work can happen fairly quickly since I control that. The hotel RFI, I think, will take a bit longer because that's dependent on outside investment. So that's going to require establishing relationships, convincing them it's a worthwhile investment. The facade improvements and code improvements, so that's grant administration, that's setting up a program, that's giving businesses an adequate time to respond and implement, so it's going to take a bit longer. Broadband, there's roughly 5 programs, so that's going to be many years out. And then for EV charging and recompete, I don't have all the deadlines from the federal government yet, so those timeframes are a bit more uncertain. That's it.
Thank you for this presentation. I'm so excited that we have somebody dedicated to following all these threads that have been priorities of us for a long time. So this is really exciting and I really appreciate the update. Supervisor Spatier?
I appreciate the presentation very much. A lot of potential for a lot of collaboration and different stakeholders taking part in that. Love the collaboration with Lake EDC as well. One of the things that's not mentioned in here, and it's a separate division, maybe in the same division, but it's housing. Economic development cannot happen without the housing available to, sometimes you're going to have to bring in some staff to fill in the new businesses that are coming in. And so we've got to make sure that we parallel that with our housing efforts, and I know that that's still moving forward as far as getting that accomplished. Just wanted to highlight that. Another part of it, and you tried to pull the rug from under my feet with your first statement. You said this is not a strategic plan. I see this as a part of a much larger strategic plan. Without the economic development strategic plan, to do any other part of a strategic plan for the county, how are you going to afford it? You have to have an economic development plan within that. And so I just, I don't know what our timeline is or what our expectations are of building a much broader county-wide strategic plan, which is not just admin department or CDD, it's most other departments overall, so that we can have a progress meter of how we're meeting our goals and what's the next thing to attempt to do. Just kind of wondering, I don't know if that's something that you can answer to or if admin can answer, CAO Parker, but just kind of curious where we are with getting to that point. This is a great opportunity here to have something that we can share with the public and then slowly show the check boxes of things getting accomplished. I love those types of plans. Investors love those types of plans. But I want to see that broader one and kind of curious when we might get to that.
I don't mean to speak for Ben, but I'm going to. I think the first 3 months here, he was introducing himself, doing the community outreach, meeting with different stakeholders and agencies, and developing this work plan, and actually getting up to speed on California opportunities. And I think the gradual next step is to put out possibly an RFQ here, and I'm looking at him 2-3 months.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, and get it out. And so he'll be doing a lot of these lower hanging fruit, as you say, but also doing that parallel to that. And in the meantime, I'll be working on interviewing still DCO for housing, or I have a RFQ put together if the one tomorrow doesn't pan out, and go that way as far as retaining a firm to assist us. And at least doing the assessment and starting the comprehensive housing strategic plan.
Perfect. And I wanted to bring it up for timeline purposes. I know it's something that we have already approved to move forward with. Just wanted to bring it up for this one. And then the last piece, your last slide about the frontage and the signage and whatnot, that splash of paint does a whole lot. That fixing of the fence or whatever it is that needs to happen to make our local, especially our business district, look attractive. It changes a whole lot. I know that we have a lot of, not trying to send you on a wild goose chase, but we have a lot of planned development commercial PDCs. I don't know how in-depth of a plan there was, but I see that as a potential opportunity by looking at those plans and looking at the revitalization of those areas and making sure that those plans maybe can be developed. Might be an easy place to start rather than trying to recreate the plans. I don't know if you've been through some of those PDCs. I know that if we look at our area plans, our local area plans that we have, they talk about some of those PDCs, and the vision within those area plans are amazing. And if we can somehow involve those in this economic development plan, it would be great.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, and I'm happy to work with community development on that. I think you want to kind of strike a balance with what's in those plans, with the PDCUs also, but with the individual business owner, they're going to have some vision. And so usually with facade improvement programs, you have some parameters. And it might be kind of more of a voluntary explanation and kind of getting them behind the vision. So you kind of have the hard rules. You can only use this public funds for this. But I think kind of getting everyone to row together with these facade improvements would be great.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Supervisor Green?
Yeah, very much appreciate the presentation, and the work program looks great. But a couple things sprung up while you were doing that just kind of highlighted to me between that and the Career Point presentation. It's like, what's our brand? It's are we in North Bay County, and we're really trying to get those coastal influences from that. The consortium you were talking about, Redwood Rise, all of a sudden we're with Mendo and Humboldt. And then I'm very cognizant we have an ag economy. We're linked. We don't honor it a whole lot, but Colusa and Yolo counties and our Central Valley partners over there. We don't have like one big glommy economy. We have a set of regional economies that maybe we don't understand the best, and it kind of influences our branding. So as you're doing the work program and picking from Card A and Card B and stuff like that, I am kind of curious, you mentioned a strategic plan. Is there a longer term vision that we can get a strategic plan? Because I love the little elements in the work program, but it's just like, that's a big chunk right there, but we still have this strategic planning effort and just really trying to get our heads around about how we're going to be 21st century Lake County to serve the Humboldt people, the North Bay people, our Central Valley people. What do all of those various pieces think of us? And then how, once we identify how they think of us, how can we price some money out of them?
I can answer the first part. For prizing money, that might be a little more difficult. So that is a really important part of the strategic plan. So launching in 2 to 3 months, strategic plans I've worked on in the past have done a pretty big analysis, kind of looking at the labor market, migration patterns, where you have certain strengths within industries and what are possible partnerships and key interventions you can make. From my initial impression, I do think there's a lot more similarity in kind of economic connectivity between us and Mendocino than some of the counties south of here. I understand there's a fair amount of work community going down into Sonoma County, but I think there is kind of a significant barrier there. I'm happy to work with those counties. I have had some conversations with them regarding broadband. There could be some interesting partnerships. Napa and Sonoma have done some, we'll see if they work, but they have some interesting strategies regarding broadband. So that's my initial impression, but that's also why it's good to bring on a quality consultant that has that research chops, that can really do that quantitative analysis and also the focus groups to really think that through and point us in the right direction.
And we're in a unique position because we are a region of our own, but we can collaborate with so many other regions for different reasons. And I think that that's a position of strength for us. So Supervisor Crandall.
Just real quick, just mainly comments. I'd appreciate seeing this report, first and foremost. In regard to biomass, mentioning the carbon credits and whatnot, I think that's a great idea. One of the biggest topics that we discussed at the in Colorado at the Farm, Ranch, and Rural Community of Communities, there was a high emphasis on the carbon footprint and how our recommendations at that level for the advisory committee is going to influence the Secretary of EPA to implement the Inflation Reduction Act dollars. And so giving an emphasis on how our county deals with it and whatnot, and other rural counties like RCRC, how that can help us in regards to, equity, social inclusion, and things of that nature. But what I mean by that is there's a different definition for Colorado rural counties and Michigan rural counties than there is for ours. So, being there and giving that insight, hoping that, motivated to ensure that EPA can ensure some of that funding comes to our communities as well. And I think we should probably talk more about that later, but just wanted to emphasize that.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Great job.
Oh, it's not done yet. We still have a couple more meetings, but.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So it's a huge need here, and having that EPA funding, I think, could make a project realistic. So there's the issue with biomass. It's a low margin, high volume business. Wood is pretty ubiquitous throughout the world. So how do you make that pencil? So I know Butte County, Lawson County have put a lot of work into it, and I've been talking to some leaders in those regions regarding that. So it's interesting. I know there's also other IRA tax credits in this space, and I don't think the private sector has fully developed on new technologies that might make it more economically compelling. It's primarily, at the moment, the wood pellets, which a lot are exported to Europe. We'll have to see policy-wise if they still count that as green energy. Right. But I think there's some exciting possibilities. There's definitely a growing startup space with thinking through kind of mission-driven venture capital, thinking how we can utilize this biomass.
I think too, the RCRC group, I think it's the Golden State National Resources, is working on that. I know it's been delayed. There's some, some hiccups here and there, but I know the difficult thing is a biomass facility here intact. However, I know in talking with some of the staff, they are looking to, with counties like ours, give the capability of bringing that mass to wherever the railhead is, or whatever the case may be, to provide that to give to Europe, which is in high demand, to take care of a problem. And I know that Golden State Finance mentioned that it's mainly a project that it's not going to produce a lot of revenue, but it's going to solve a problem and maintain itself. So I know you're up to par on it. I know that we've been working with them on it, but I just wanted to highlight that. Yeah. I think there was more. There was one more thing. And I like the hotel attraction strategy, in that right underneath it, you talked about the CDBG funding for economic development set aside for facade improvement, and code enforcement, because I'm one of the firm believers that with code enforcement, in which they are doing a heavy lift right now, and doing their best to take care of all the issues around the county. But with code enforcement intact, less dumping, things like that, it'll give more attraction to the situation, right? With hotels, people will come if they see more of an appealing area rather than some of the situations we have. So, yeah.
Supervisor Spatier?
I just wanted to mention one thing. I know that we passed it. I know Director Turner brought to us the AB 1236, which streamlines the installation or the processing of EV stations. Last I went to an RCRC meeting, I don't even think 50% of the counties had passed that yet, or it was getting close to that. And so maybe that gives us hopefully a head start or a better score in the competition compared to the other counties who have not passed that. And it was mandated that you have to pass it, but not every county has.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think it would be useful to put together, it could be even just a brochure, because a lot of these businesses, they're interested, but it's not like their primary concern. So if they kind of had it spelled out for them, here's kind of the tools the county has given you to make this easier. Here are the potential tax credits. Here's this larger investment coming in the EV network that might tip the scale where they decide to make that investment then.
Okay. Any questions or comments from the public? Not seeing anyone in the chambers. Is there anyone in the Zoom room?
That was a question to me, wasn't it?
Okay.
Just if
Sure.
I can make one
more.
final
Of
comment.
course.
I understand for the need for a succinct list. This is not an exhaustive list in my mind of economic development. We have a plethora of adventures to be had in Lake County, from hiking to mountain biking to horse riding to kayaking, whatever. And I think that some of those things are being looked at through other departments. For example, Public Services is working on trail systems and master planning for our parks. So I just want to say it publicly that this is not a finite list and we're not looking at anything else. There's other people, other departments that are also working on things that I feel take part in economic development that just don't make that specific list that was shared with us today.
Yeah, to comment on that specifically, so I guess to use an economic development term, the recreation economy. So when talking about kind of in the short term, building that much more robust communications platform, that is definitely for quality of life, which is a major selling point here for starting and maintaining a business. So for the different outdoor opportunities, and I think there can be a good amount of work too, kind of just bringing up to speed different materials that highlight that for people that are outside the county or even people in the county. Like I've had to spend a fair amount of time outdoors, and it takes a good amount of research to really figure out what's all available in Lake County. So to make that more readily accessible, I think, you're checking a few different boxes, and that's definitely part of the short-term work plan.
And we're having a meeting about that tomorrow. You. And him.
I'm on it?
Yeah. And Lars.
That's right, okay.
It's all coming back.
It's all coming together. Okay, well, thank you for the presentation today, and this is exciting. We're on this really, this path that we've been wanting to get on for a long time, and we're looking forward to your next presentation.
Sounds great.
All right, thanks.
Thank
Ben.
you.
Okay.